We're going to be having a lively discussion with Democrat Stephanie Stahl Hamilton. Representative Stahl Hamilton was elected to the Arizona House of Representatives in 2022, representing District 21. She assumed office on January 3rd, 2023. Her term ends on January 13th, 2025. She will give an update on the legislative session, discuss water and the work she has been doing, and also a more broad overview of the separation of church and state with updates on happenings at the national level. So, Stephanie, the floor is yours. Welcome aboard.
Anything happen like this, Stefan?
Great, thank you. Yeah, no, it is a pleasure to be here. And as Susie mentioned, it took us a long time to get to sine die. Is the longest session in history, in that we went 204 days. So for supposedly 100-day legislature, we doubled that and then some. Although I should point out that my very first session back in 2021 was, I think, the second or third longest. We went all the way down to the last day of June before sine die. And that's important to know, because July 1st is when the fiscal year resets and starts. And one of the most important things that we do as a legislature is set the budget for the state's spending and states' monies. And to not have a budget on July 1st would have caused a shutdown of a lot of our government agencies. And so that was my very first session back in 2021. And last year in 2022, we ended I want to say June 24th or June 26th. We went almost as long. And then this year, we were there until June 12th, and we took a break and came back on July 31st. So we weren't actually reporting in every day. We had a little bit of a recess in between, but we still technically were in session. Although we had already passed the budget in May. So it was a very interesting session, to say the least. While we were certainly celebrating the victory of Katie Hobbs, a Democratic governor, it provided some interesting dynamics this session. And of course, with the new administration came new agency, directors of each of the agencies, which is a process of not only those director jobs being appointed and hired, but then they needed to be confirmed. And there were a lot of hiccups this session, a lot of frustrating hiccups this session with our Senate. And that, we still have a Republican majority by one seat in each of the chambers, the Senate and the House. But the Senate is where the hangups were, and quite a few incredible candidates who were put forward to be directors of these different agencies were not approved, which, after already having been hired and started the job, the approval is, in the past, has functioned pretty much as a rubber stamp of the governor's choice and choosing. And unfortunately, this go around, there was a lot of obstruction. And so some really incredibly talented people were then fired from their jobs, or did not get to continue the work that they thought they were going to be doing. Very disruptive to people's personal lives, but also to our departments and agencies that help run our state. And it's hard to work in a chaotic environment. And so this is what we are finding, that there's a lot of obstruction and a lot of chaos making. And I have my own theories as to why I think that is. Some of it is, I think we are and have been so close to gaining a majority in each of these chambers that I think this is one little last grasp of trying to hold on to power as long as people can, because they know they're getting ready to lose power. And I think this upcoming election cycle, we'll see if that bears out. But I think we definitely in both chambers have a path to the majority. And so what we're seeing here is some incredibly anxious and reactionary behavior. And unfortunately, it's without consideration to the people of our state and people's lives. There were a couple of wins when it came to the budget. And I'll back up and say, the Republicans started out the very first week of session saying, first thing we're going to do is pass the budget. Speaker of the House said he wasn't going to hear any bills until we'd passed a budget, which to their own detriment, they had a freshman member on their side that was using that ultimatum as leverage to try to get a hearing for a lot of really horrible election bills that she was sponsoring. And she held her ground for a month. And so the very first month of this legislative session, we spent the first 3 weeks, we didn't really do anything in our committees. And nothing was going to the floor because the speaker had said he would not hear any legislation until the budget was passed. And she would not sign. They didn't have their 31 votes, and there certainly wasn't a Democrat that was going to vote for any of the budget policy that was rammed down our throats in the Appropriations Committee. So that's how we started the session. And as it turns out, the budget discussions went all the way till May. And it was really unfortunate that once we got to the budget, we couldn't go into sine die then. That would have been a pretty reasonable time to end session and for all of us to be able to take a breather. But there was some pretty big policy work that was left undone. And so we did have to continue to come back and try to get some of that policy across the finish line. In the budget this year, a significant win was the $150 million that was put back into the Housing Trust Fund. I think as those of you who follow along have known that back in the height of the recession, the Housing Trust Fund account was swept. All the money was withdrawn. And over time, a few investments were put back in, but that money was earmarked and could only be used for I think it was 4 different areas. So it was very special areas where people could get at the money for the Housing Trust Fund. It wasn't comprehensive and it didn't serve all of the people in the state of Arizona. And so this year to have that as a priority and a focus, that felt really good to know that there was $150 million put back into the Housing Trust Fund. One of the governor's goals was to stop and try to curtail the universal voucher expansion. That did not happen, which has put us in a position of having over $1 billion of money that is being pulled out of our general fund, money that we don't have that's in there. And interestingly enough, I think that $1 billion was what we were asking for, and the Invest in Ed people were asking for back in 2017, 6 years ago, to get our schools into a space of actually having some decent funding. So not only were we $1 billion short every year that they could pinpoint in 2017, but fast forward 6 years, and not only have we not returned a lot of that revenue, or revenue hasn't been put into education, now it's coming out of the general fund because of the universal vouchers expansion and creating, it's putting us in a very precarious position for the next 2 years when there will not be any extra money coming into the general fund. We've got to find that $1 billion somewhere. So there was some tension there in that budget. And unfortunately, the way things played out in the policy realm, a lot of us felt like we had to choose between housing and education, between scholarships for our DACA students and expanding kids care. They pitted these very specific policy areas against one another, as opposed to us saying, no, here's our agenda, here are our values, and these are supports that need to be funded across the board for the people, for our people of Arizona. And unfortunately, there was some picking and choosing that happened within the budget. And while there are folks who really advocated hard for these issues, and yes, there were some wins, but it's awfully hard to call it a win when we know that there are still gaping holes within the supports that our people in the state of Arizona need. So I think that is a little bit of an overview with this session. And this will lead me into the next topic. And we had some knockdown, drag out water fights. As you know, the last couple of years, the headlines are not painting a very rosy picture of water in Arizona. And I am fortunate enough to have served on NRU, the Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committee, all 3 years that I have been serving. I am the ranking member in the House of Representatives for the Democrats. I have lived and worked all over this state and have spent a lot of time in my interim times traveling the state, getting into rural Arizona, because groundwater in our rural areas is of great concern. We have now 6 areas in Arizona that we call active management areas, where water is pretty well monitored and regulated. There are some good laws that came out of the Groundwater Management Act from the 1980s that go a long way in protecting our groundwater, but it's mostly in our urban areas, a little bit into rural Arizona. But that is a little over 20% of our state that actively manages our groundwater. 80% of our state does not. And it's in that 80% area that is mostly rural Arizona where people can pump indiscriminately. And that is what is causing us to drain our aquifers. You know, the spaces are underground water. Our aquifers are spaces that are filled with water. And as the level of water drops, keeping those spaces open, the things start to crumble. And that's where we see the fissures. Our aquifers are some of the oldest water on Earth. It is prehistoric water, and it is not an infinite natural resource. It is finite. The groundwater will replenish itself, but not at the rate at which we are pumping in the state of Arizona. And what complicates a lot of that as well is that we, out of our 22 tribes, we have 10 tribes that still do not have their water rights. Those cases have not been settled. And it really is hard to know how to allocate water for everybody, when you don't know who's getting what. And so year after year, we Democrats have had these conversations about what needs to happen in rural Arizona. We have introduced legislation that will take small steps, hoping to get some small wins to build towards bigger wins. And it just isn't possible. We are not being able at this point to make any headway. Now, the governor has stepped in, and we are thankful that she has, and she's established the governor's groundwater advisory council, and they are doing a lot of good work. And I think the way we are going to make ground on this groundwater, where we are going to make some headway, is outside of legislative policy. I think some of it has got to be executive order, and some of it has got to be pressure from the public. And one of the things that happened that really has increased some of that pressure is Douglas has created their own AMA. And in the Douglas Basin, the people themselves decided they needed to take matters into their own hands. And so instances like that are where our people have done a little flexing. It's been embraced, and it hasn't been a smooth process, but they're figuring it out, and they're making it work. Another area of water that is of great concern, it happens in our active management areas, and that is this thing that's called a wildcat subdivision loophole. And this is where we have issues like the Rio Verde foothills north of North Scottsdale. The Rio Verde foothills is it's an exclusive area in North Scottsdale that is not in the city, so it's not in city limits, and that land was divided and subdivided just enough times that they are not beholden to the subdivision rules of having to prove that there is 100 years worth of water. So these subdivisions are called wildcat subdivisions. So developers can go in, and as long as they don't split lots more than 6 times, they can build on those lots and not have to have an assured water supply certificate saying that there is enough water to last for 100 years. Well, the folks in Rio Verde foothills, that is exactly what's going on. The city of Scottsdale was providing their water, but 2 years ago, knowing that we were going to go into water shortages with our surface waters, told the folks of the Rio Verde foothills that they would no longer supply the water. They gave a cutoff date, and the city and the folks in that community didn't believe them. And in January, when the water came off, they came to the legislature to say, we don't have any water. How can you help us? And part of the challenge was they chose to live out there because they didn't want any government interference. But then when they had no water and no protections in place, they were coming back to the government to say, fix our water problem. This is happening all over Arizona. They so happen to be in an active management area, but it's happening in rural Arizona, and there are no protections in place. And so this is one of the things that we have been trying to do, is to close this loophole and to see where these lot splits are happening. And so that was a very, very contentious issue that we had to step through this year as a legislature. And then one final piece, when we're looking at water, and this actually has to be solved at the federal level, and that's really unfortunate. And I talked about our tribes. Our tribes, we only 10 of them. Well, we have 10 without their water rights. And back when things started to get settled and there were treaties made, the federal government awarded land to our tribes, but with that land, they severed the water rights. And so now, as we're going in for our tribes to try to get their water rights, they have to trade land for water. And that's not in state statute, that is federal policy. And so a lot of these water right cases have been in adjudication for a long time, and they've not been settled. Just last summer, we were at 12 and 2 tribes finally settled, and they got crappy deals. So, this is something that we are starting to work with in concert with our governor, because I think there is an executive order that she can take to marry land and water back for our tribes, so that they don't end up losing land in order to get water. And then when they do get their water rights, there needs to be money and infrastructure so that water is clean water for drinking and for their lives. So as you can see, that's just a little bit of what we're doing in water. In the urban areas, we know that both in Maricopa, the West Valley and the East Valley, modeling and studies have been done to show that they are starting to be in a space where the developers cannot obtain assured water certificates, meaning that there's not 100 years worth of water supply. So they've had to put a moratorium on construction, which has really put the developers in a space. And so there's lots of accusations that the modeling wasn't scientific. It wasn't done properly. We've got plenty of water. Why do we have to stop and protect, when actually the science bears out that we need to have a moratorium on certain types of development, and especially as folks are moving out and continuing the urban sprawl. What we find with infrastructure, affordability, and sustainability with housing and water is infill is the best route to go, because the infrastructure is already there. And the supplies are a little bit better. It's so much more manageable than just continuing to push out and develop open land and open spaces. So I think, oh gosh, there's so much more to say, but without getting too wonky and in the weeds, I think let me pause here. I see Lillian has her hand up, and I can take some questions, and then we can go in a different direction if you folks would like to do that. But I'll stop
Okay,
here.
Stephanie, what we're going to do I'm flying solo, so all questions will be in the chat room.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Barbara Warren has a question. What is happening with worker heat protection legislation?
Yes, I'm glad you asked, Barbara. Representative Mariana Sandoval, who represents LD 23, which it encompasses the whole Tohono O'odham Nation. And so she lives in Goodyear, but her district runs all the way down to Yuma and across through Maricopa and in just a little bit of Tucson. The worker that passed away this summer due in the fields is in her district, and she immediately has jumped on that and I think she's done several press conferences. She has legislation that that she'll be ready to drop once we start again in January. She's been in conversation with the governor's office, and I think has done extensive interviews. So she has been working hard on this. I think some of that, coupled with some things happening in Phoenix, spurred the governor on to do a little bit of work with these cooling centers. And how we're looking at extreme heat. So and I'm glad you brought it up. It is in the works. I know Rep. Sandoval's husband is a plumber. This is something that he deals with on a daily basis in the work field. So she certainly understands how important it is, how critical it is, and has been very, very motivated to pick up the mantle and to run with it.
Okay, Larry Bodine asks the question, how do we take the majority in the state legislature?
Yeah, it's always hard to name names for me. Should this get out, it feels like I'm coming at people, but I think it's important to tell the truth and to have the conversations. And certainly anything that I'm telling you has not been in the newspapers. So in the Senate, there is the Dino approval committee, and it was something that Senator Jake Hoffman put together. And I think it's Senator Hoffman, Senator Peterson, Senator Kerr. And honestly, I'm not sure the two Democrats that serve on it, but obviously as what we're used to in that committees are stacked and the power dynamics do not go in our favor. The freshman legislator who was wanting all of her outrageous election bills was the freshman legislator who was expelled. And I think you guys, I'm sure most of you all have been following along with that, but that was Representative Harris.
Okay. Who will you be running in LD 21 in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I have not filed just yet. I appreciate the question. I certainly, as much as I have been out in the field and I've spent a lot of time on the road the last 3 weeks. I've been down to Bisbee twice, down to Tubac, Rio Rico 3 times, minus the 2 days a week I'm up in Phoenix. And as I'm spreading out in the district, I really it is very different from the old LD10, but I have to tell you, I really appreciate the urban and rural parts of this district. It certainly broke the rules for how we redistrict and the criteria. But as a child, I was born and raised up in northeastern Arizona on Navajo tribal lands. And so there is a very big part of my heart that resides in rural Arizona. The challenges in rural Arizona are very different than what we would experience in Midtown Tucson. And Midtown Tucson is even very different than what we find in the south part of Tucson. That's in my district, and you know, the Sunnyside School District area. Very, very different demographics in all three parts of this district that also has a foot in three counties. And so I am serving. It is an honor and a privilege to serve the people in this new district. I have come to love the different spaces. I'm enjoying getting to know the nuances of this expanse. And you know, like I said, I haven't filed my statement of interest. I think I needed to get out of this session and catch my breath for a minute. My husband and my youngest now are back in school. My middle just started the U of A today. And so now I think I'm finally in a space where I can think about reelection. And I would say right now the chances are highly likely that I will run again, and you know, hopefully as long as the voters will have me, you know, I feel like I'm really happy to stay in the fight and to serve. You know, we've got so much work to do, and while at times it seems frustrating, I'm getting a really good handle on how to find leverage outside of the committee work to make things happen for the people in my district.
Okay, can you speak about the Democratic leadership?
On what level? Like, can we clarify? I can speak about Democratic leadership in the House. I can speak, I mean, a little bit at what I've experienced from the governor. Yeah, at which level of government do you want me to speak about?
Stephanie, was there an election for new leadership in the House? And
Yes.
do we have the same leadership in the Senate?
Right, correct. No, okay, yeah, no, I can absolutely speak about that, and it's a very relevant question. You know, in May, Representative Andreas Cano from LD20 was our elected leader for this last session, and he resigned his leadership role, and then eventually in late June, early July, resigned from the ledge to go to Harvard to get his master's in public administration. And he was an incredible leader, but that sparked a re-election for the House Democrats. And so Representative Lupe Contreras, who I served with over in the Senate, was assistant minority leader, then was elected, became the elected leader, and freshman Representative Oscar de los Santos is now our assistant leader. He is from LD, I think it's the new 11, and is an incredibly talented, bright young man. You know, so we've got leader Contreras, who's got 10 years of service now 11 years of service in the legislature as the minority leader, coupled with Rep. De Los Santos, who is our assistant leader. And then Representative, our very own Nancy Gutierrez, who is in LD18, was elected as co-whip to serve alongside of Representative Melody Hernandez, who was already one of our co-whips. So we pretty much, you know, shook up the slate a little bit. I really had appreciated Representative Cano's leadership, and he and Rep. Contreras really they worked very well together, and it really was a pleasure to watch them at work. And you know, and I think Contreras he stepped into the role nicely. He was assistant leader over in the Senate for 4 years with Senator Rebecca Rios, so he certainly has served in leadership with some heavy hitters and some real talent. And so I'm so thankful that, you know, at this point that he's at the helm. The Senate, when Senator Raquel Taran resigned partway through the session to run for Congress, there was a re-election over in that body with Senator Mitzi Epstein being elected as leader, and I think Senator Juan Mendez is the assistant leader. And for the life of me, I can't remember who the whips are over there, but I know that Senator Leila Alston has the position of Dean of the Senate. She is the oldest serving member over in the Senate, but also I think with the longest tenure. Senator Alston has been around for a long time and is quite the stateswoman. So hopefully that gets to your question, Lucy.
Okay, let's see. I see that the Arizona Water Monitoring Fund is going broke. May we be insolvent by 2026? Do you have any info on this?
So I think where some of that will get picked up. I don't have direct info on that, but you know, with WIFA, the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority, I know they got 2 years ago, got quite a bit of money, grant monies. A lot of that came from ARPA funds, and that money got earmarked. I think 200 million got earmarked for conservation, which I think some of the well monitoring. So there's been some, and I just was appointed to the WIFA board. So my first meeting was last week, and I'm starting to dig into all of this. But this is a fight that Democrats and Republicans have had for years at the legislature, and that is monitoring our wells and trying to put measures in place so we know how much water is being pumped, where it's going, and then how we can make changes. One of the nice things about WIFA is, and this conservation money, it's going in and it is helping to replace faulty machines that help us with our water and help us conserve. And I believe that ADWR, it has been asking for people to voluntarily put devices on their wells to start monitoring so that we can see what's going where. And the pushback from all of this, because to me, it just makes sense. You know, our checking accounts, we don't overspend what's in our checking accounts, right? Our bank accounts. We shouldn't over allocate and overspend the water that we have as a resource, and yet we have over allocated it, but it's hard to get a number on that because we do not monitor a lot of our wells. And so I think where the tension or where we butt heads is that the Republicans see this as a privacy issue. They don't want the government poking into their business, and the Democrats are saying, no, you have a right to privacy, but this water belongs to no one. You might have the right to use the water, but the water does not belong to anybody. And so we need to know what we have so that everybody has enough, you know, to live. And somehow we cannot move beyond the idea of this is a violation of privacy, and people don't want to be told by the government what to do on their private land. Well, and this is how you have communities that run out of water. So I absolutely, and DGT always brings the best questions. And so I am going to go ahead and look into that fund. My guess is that a lot of this has been shifted to WIFA because they are putting in place some monitoring and they're upgrading equipment to make sure we are conserving more. So no, that was a really good question. Thank you.
Okay, Stephanie, what can be done to eliminate the outrageous school voucher program?
You know, at this point, it's gotta come from executive action. And I know the governor is working really hard to try to figure it out. I think, unfortunately, you know, the state seems to really manage a lot of policy through loopholes, and it's frustrating and maddening to me how many loopholes we're constantly putting into state statute. The fact that our Constitution says that public tax dollars belong in the public schools, not to be used for private education, private religious education. And the workaround was that, oh no, we're giving the money to the parents to spend directly. And they can homeschool, they can do these micro schools. It is maddening because it really is violating the spirit of the law. And at this point, because of how this was voted upon, it's going to take executive action from our governor. I think we've tried again and again and again, you know, when Save Our Schools, and I worked on that No on 305 campaign, when Arizonans overwhelmingly, you know, 2/3 to 1/3 said, we want our public dollars in our public schools, and the legislature crafted a different bill to overturn the will of the people. I mean, that should have been the end of the discussion, and it was not. And it was Governor Ducey who pushed for this. He told people outright when he first was elected, this was the hill he was going to die on. And I think right now it would have to be the governor's office, and I'm just not quite sure the legal workarounds, but I do know that the governor's office and the AEA are in constant communication as to how we can attack this to unravel this area that is really decimating our general fund, and money that we need for so many other things in Arizona, let alone the fact that it's pulling more from our public schools, and yet it's that same amount that we needed 6 years ago to get our schools fully functioning.
Okay. Let's see. And I had it all queued up. So who was in the legislature, who was blocking legislation? I got to get this again. Who was blocking the confirmations in the Senate? And
Yeah,
who was submitting the voter restricting bills?
Yeah, we addressed that one earlier. Let me grab this question, Joe.
Sure.
Any possible changes with mining laws in Arizona? Oh, hoo doggy. Boy, do I wish. You know, I was just down at Rio Rico High School last Thursday. South 32, which is the Hermosa mine in the Patagonia Mountains, was there. And I have to tell you, the people of Rio Rico and Tubac are up in arms. Boy, they showed up in force, and really are pushing back. But again, three things in rural Arizona that drive the economy, that hold a lot of power, and in places that are really deep red districts are agriculture, mining, and cattle. And so that's for folks who work in those sectors and folks who profit from those occupations, it's a small minority compared, small number compared to the expanse of the state of Arizona. But all three of those require water. And when you start looking at water, that is where the power is, and those three entities. Now, an interesting dynamic, and I'll get a little bit wonky here, in Rio Rico and Tubac, because the residents in that area don't want mining to drive the economy in that area because it disrupts so much. They are starting to look at the manganese ore that's being mined, which actually they've dug into the health part of all of this and the science of it all, and have connected the dots with mad cow disease and certain brain damage in humans. So in that area, there are cattle ranchers and there are farms. And so one of the things that the residents are starting to do is talk to the cattle ranchers and the farmers. And so there might be a little bit of a wedge there to disrupt something. But unfortunately, until we can flip our chambers, our laws are not going to change. They're not. We've got our head of NRU in both chambers from rural Arizona, and they are the first to protect those industries in the state of Arizona. I will give a shout out to Gail Hartman and the folks of the Save the Scenic Santa Ritas who continue to show up and push back. And the folks in the folks in Rio Rico and Tubac are starting to align. And, I think along with water stuff, I think as long as people are starting to protest and starting to apply pressure, that will help shift. But absolutely not until we flip chambers are we not going to be able to make much of a difference. We can have executive orders from our governor. She can block, she can veto, but as far as, then that's playing defense. But actually changing laws, I don't. Until we can change the power dynamic, I don't foresee it happening anytime soon. And I wish that wasn't the case.
Okay. So we get a little point of information from Lucy Messing.
Yeah.
Senator Eva Birch from LD9 is the whip in the state Senate.
Great, thank you.
then-
Yeah, and Eva Birch is a freshman. She's an incoming freshman. So I guess that's probably why she wasn't on my radar. I did not serve with her. So thank you for that, Lucy.
Yeah. And then how is the flat tax going to affect budgets?
Oh, it already has, Jim. And it's a good question. And it just, oh my gosh, stabbed to the heart. We have used up as much extra money as we have been given from the federal government. The flat tax has already reduced the amount of money that's coming into the general fund. We don't have enough money to make this budget work. And the next 2 years, all of this surplus that happened because of ARPA dollars, it's used. It got thrown into this year's budget. And so we are extremely concerned about the next 2 years in particular. I know that the Democrats are in conversation, working hard to try to figure out how we move forward. But my guess is a lot of things are going to be frozen and we're going to go back to having to cut budgets for a lot of our state spending. Yeah, no, I'm glad you're paying attention, Jim. I'm glad you're connecting the dots with the flat tax. It did exactly what we said it was going to do. And oh my God, we have the resources and the revenue in this state to fund everything that needs to happen. But because we serve with a majority who thinks there's never been a tax cut that they haven't embraced or cuddled up against, it has the ability of making our resources very scarce. So I hate that that's so negative, but that is the reality of it. And again, I appreciate the fact that you were paying attention. We need more people paying attention to tax policy in our state. It matters. It makes a difference.
Okay, Stephanie, why does the state of Arizona not recognize tribes in Arizona? The federal government recognized 28 tribes. This info from tribes across the border.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. Let me see if I can get at what you're trying to ask and frame it in a way that we can all digest. Right now we've got 22 tribes in Arizona. Arizona does recognize the tribes, but not always. I think in Tucson, we're very lucky that all of our public events start with a land acknowledgement. We are constantly putting at the forefront whose land we're on. And that doesn't happen throughout the state. So with a simple land acknowledgement first, but I have, oh my gosh, I've pushed back. I got in a lot of trouble over in the Senate because I raised an issue about the massacre that happened at Lee's Ferry. And then we were putting the Lee's Ferry bell as a monument on our state capitol. I pushed back and can't believe that we would make a memorial for somebody who massacred a whole bunch of people and then wanted to blame it on one of the tribes, right? Like I think it's baked into our DNA that we don't recognize the tribes. it plays out in all of our policy. It plays out in the water, it plays out in the land. I have listened to my colleagues from the Navajo Nation stand up and speak their truth when it comes to elections, and have watched my Caucasian colleagues stand up and say that's not the way it works. So I I don't know how else to say it other than, I think we still in a lot of areas in our state still have unquestioned systemic white supremacy at play. I when talking about water and I spoke out strongly against the Rio Verde foothills and making it a legislative solution coming to the legislature. It should have been an intergovernmental agreement between the community of Rio Verde foothills and the city of Scottsdale. That is where that water war needed to be solved, but it came to the legislature. It's very special legislation, and I made the point for people, to say, listen, this is not new in Arizona. And I talked about how over 50 years ago, when I lived on Navajo tribal lands, saw the inequity and power dynamic of water distribution. And we know that during the pandemic, the lack of water and water infrastructure on the Navajo Nation, COVID decimated their community. And so I stood up and said, this has been happening for 50 years and nothing has changed. And yet the moment this small, tiny, wealthy community starts to run out of water, you're down here trying to get it fixed. And so I think we have systems in place and they're unexamined. And I don't think people want to examine. We talk about these boarding schools, and we talk about children being pulled from their homes, sent away, pulled out of their communities, sent away, proselytized, right? There's a lot that we've done, and it's all a power dynamic wrapped up in white supremacy that I think is very unchecked and unexamined in our state. And I don't have a better answer than we've got to do better. And I think Tucson makes a huge attempt to do better. Folks were really up in arms when some of that land was given back, to the tribe over there on the west side of Tucson. And I just thought, this is fantastic, because again, as a state, we've separated land from water for our tribes, and they got to get their land back without having to trade water rights for it. I think we need to lean into these tensions and look at the power dynamic at play, and we need to be honest about our history. We need to tell the truth about what has happened, and we need that history to shape us as we move forward.
Okay, let's hear it for Stephanie. We really appreciate your being here today with us, and always appreciate your passion.
Thank you.
And we're so glad that you represent us up in Phoenix.
It is an honor and a pleasure. And again, as long as the voters have me, I really, truly believe that's where I need to be. I'm always accessible. I think most of you know how to get a hold of me. Please don't ever hesitate to reach out. The best part of my job is constituent engagement. Keeps me grounded and helps remind me why I do what I do. It's absolutely for the people. So thank you, Joe, for moderating. It's really great to see you again.
It's good to see you. And we'll have to make sure that down the road you come and visit again.
I'd love to anytime. Thank you.